Yakshimaj, everyone. It's Dan from Atlas Lens Co., and we're here on another Telecast Tuesday. I bet if you're just joining us now, you were expecting to get a restream, and you would be right, because today we're going to be doing a restream of a great discussion I had with Mark Irwin, ASC, CSC. But first, let me not be remiss to give technical thanks to B for running the technical production today. Big shout out, B. I think B also ran the technical production on the day of the original live stream with Mark Irwin, ASC, CSC, talking about the history of widescreen film formats, not just anamorphic history, but widescreen formats in general. And if anyone was lucky enough to catch the ASC Awards this year, the theme of the award show was the world in widescreen, which, one of Atlas's mottos is Atlas Anamorphic Worldwide. And I would be remiss not to thank Devonte, who's here with us in the room. Big thank you, Devonte. Always giving me inspiration, hope, and heart for a new day and a new month here at Atlas Lens Co. So, how many of you out there are thinking about joining us at NAB in Las Vegas, Nevada, North Hall, booth number N1725, April 6th through 9th? If you are even remotely thinking about coming to NAB, I would just say, just do it. The world is kind of a scary place right now. Sometimes we need to just take a little moment, reset, thank ourselves, thank our friends, our families, our colleagues, and do a little me time. So why don't we get a little me time in Las Vegas together? Booth N1725, North Hall. A little bit of a mix-up this year. Normally we're in Central Hall. This year they're doing some construction. So we're in North Hall. Looking forward to seeing you there. And would love to hear in the comments, comment below what you'd like to see at NAB 2025. Hopefully we'll be seeing you there. And good news, we might have some very special giveaways for those of you who subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you come to our booth and you show that you're subscribed, we will have a very special prize for you, no cap. All right, folks, without further ado, let's present Mark Irwin, ASC, CSC, and myself talking about the history of widescreen cinema right here on the stream. Like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube. Come to Wednesday Lens Day. We have a banger going tomorrow. 10:30 a.m. to 1:30 here in Glendale, California, 6933 San Fernando Road, Glendale 91201. And otherwise, we'll see you in Las Vegas. All right. See you soon. Yakshimaj, peace out.
Counting, too.
Happy Telecast Tuesday, everyone. We're back here again.
Again. We can't get rid of ourselves.
We tried, but we're back. Great to see everyone out there. We're here with Mark Irwin, ASC, CSC here today. And we thought we would treat everyone to a little look through the lens of history, if you will, into the origins of widescreen filmmaking and how, in a way, that begat anamorphic cinematography, right? Because widescreen existed well before anamorphic cinematography. But some might say that anamorphic concepts date back to ancient art history as well. So that's something we could, if something that you always mention that inspires me to think about things is that, in a way, motion picture technology has been with us since the dawn of humanity, right? Your story about the Lascaux cave paintings.
Yes.
I love that story.
And what we see as a method of communicating, telling stories with pictures, you can see on the cave walls in paintings on different walls in different caves, world famous and ancient. It's funny, somebody was asking, how did they paint those in the dark in the cave? Well, I think there was a torch involved, a flame of some sort. That was the light, and bringing the stories to light. And this was at a time when we did not have, or they did not have, our ancestors did not have a spoken language in common, or certainly not a written language, so they just used pictures and said in their pictures, this is me at org killing mastodon and poking this oxen or whatever it was. But my view on the world we look at, how we look at the world, everyone, we are all upright, carbon-based, oxygen-breathing humanoids. And we all have these globular things in the center of our head. And that's how we see.
The lentils are lentils, right?
Our lentils, that's right. So we end up transmitting what we see into our brain. And that's imagery. And a 50 mil is kind of what we have in common. So we don't see the world in widescreen. We see it, we as people, now, millions of years later, still see things like that. Why are we drawn to something that is wider than that? And it's my belief, and I'm certainly not an anthropologist, but I feel that when we lived in trees, we didn't need to see wide because there were trees and leaves and branches in the way. But and historically speaking, it didn't just jump out of a tree, but evolved into walking upright through grasslands in Africa, at which point, I'm not protected by branches and trees anymore. I gotta be watching. So the view, peripheral or otherwise, now it became deliberate, and your mind was seeing things at a wider scope. And I was thinking about that, and I realized somebody who goes who went to live theater, that was the basis from the Globe Theater in Shakespeare's time, that you'd be in a mass of people, total strangers, looking at performers on the stage. And those performers were strung out on a wide stage, even though a proscenium tended to be taller. The Romans and the Greeks and the Babylonians said, this is the golden section, 1, 3, 3 to 1. That's what we're going to do. But people are only so tall. So that you ended up seeing the audience seeing the performers laterally as opposed to vertically. But I can only imagine, and this was in our, not in our lifetime, but in our society, 100 years ago, movies were in full swing, 1924. But let's say the turn of the century, 1900, people would go to see a performance at the theater on a Friday night. The curtain would go down. They'll say, let's come back tomorrow night. They come back the next night, the curtain goes up, and there's just a white wall. What happened? And then, we got an image on the wall. And now the image has taken up the whole screen. What used to be their preference watching actors is now 1, 3, 3 to 1. It's a taller image. And yet, as opposed to being annoyed or bored by that, now you have exciting things, trains coming out at the audience, and boring stuff like people walking out of a factory, and exciting stuff like the Great Train Robbery. So our head got into that as a marketing standard. That's what we saw. That's what Hollywood saw us. Well, just 1, 3, 3, that's fine.
So the way that we're filling the box in terms of the box being like where we're telling a story changed dramatically over the years, right? In a way, like we're given this idea of a box, but then how do we fill that box to tell a story or to delight and entertain people? It shifts. So going with that notion, do you think that in the next 100 years, now that people are looking at vertical devices in their hands all the time in their pocket, do you think that this is going to change the way that we think about movies and the way that we think about visual storytelling?
Unfortunately, what we're going to see in the future, and this is interesting, this guy had a great idea a long time ago. Let's see if we can put that together. His name was Hugo. I'm blanking on his last name, but this was kind of a comedy thing. And he saw the future in different ways.
So he's got his Apple Vision Pro or his MetaVision headset there to sort of...
well, yeah,
look at this.
People got into 3D. That was the next gimmick. They got people away from the TV set, watching Milton Berle and I Love Lucy and Ralph Cramden. And, 3D, let's go to the movies, see it in 3D. And so this is kind of a joke. This is our future, though, where we don't need to go to the movies and sit next to total strangers.
We're in the movies now.
Yeah, because your brain, your actual cortex is the screen. So in terms of images, you put these on, and now your proscenium, your screen, is inside your brain. So whatever future that holds for us, sitting next to total strangers and paying $8 for 3 cents worth of popcorn, those days are gone. But this is how it started. And everyone said we can make it wider. We'll use different things. VistaVision was one of them, which only went so wide. It was 8 perf.
So for those who may be in the audience who are less familiar with even the notion of a film strip, because because a lot of people who are probably tuned in might have just grown up shooting with a digital camera.
Right.
And if you're looking at these film examples here, the type of film that most motion picture people were shooting would be what they'd call 4-perf, right? And that would
Right.
be that, again,
Here's-
that golden ratio.
Here's 35 mil. That's kind of what Edison came up with, and 24 frames a second. He said 2 dozen. That seems about right. So there was not a lot of exploration in the mechanics of it. Certainly in Edison's mind. The French had other ideas. You can see here 8 mil, Super 8, 16. These were considered the home movie stocks in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s.
So smaller slices of pie to put your picture on,
Yeah.
and more economical because you're using a smaller substrate of film. So you could get, for that 16 millimeter, that would be about half of a slice of 35 millimeter film stock.
Yeah.
So it'd be lower cost, and then
1/4 actually. And a 16 mil frame is the average thumbnail. So if you have a lot of thumbnails to put on your computer screen or your home movie or your TV, big TV at home, you have to have a lot of detail on that thumbnail to blow it up. And that's why the development in motion picture technology, certainly from Hollywood's standpoint, was based on 35 mil. And that gave you this golden section. And that from the 20s to the 50s for sure, that was what you did.
and that film stock, that 4 perforation, I think they call that Kodak. They'd call it foxholes. There'd be fox cutout perforations, right, for the Fox cameras. But then that format, what many of us think of as a stills format of 35 millimeter, is what we call VistaVision in motion picture because it's 8 perforations. So it's actually,
horizontal, yeah.
Like Oscar Barnack and the Leitz camera took that motion picture film and then repurposed it for taking still pictures because a lot of people were shooting like 6x6 negatives.
Yeah,
Even with like a Brownie camera, you'd have a pretty big negative
2 1/4
size,
square,
right?
yeah,
2
that
1/4
was a
square.
standard.
So that's a pretty big chunk. But then, in a way, this was an economical way of getting street photography done, reusing
Although
that motion
I
picture
believe
stock, right?
VistaVision, that was a time when the studios had their own everything, camera department, grip department, studios, theater chains, that was it.
Vertical integration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked great, except somebody at Paramount said, I know, let's make this horizontal system. And we'll talk about studios and rental houses and visionaries. That's all irrelevant. This is the top of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is the theater chains. The actual 5 to 6 to 7,000 theaters that existed at Hollywood at its height. They're the ones who said, okay, that's great. We don't want to change. So if you want us to project
Distribute
this,
the movie, right?
yeah, you
It's
have to give it to
distribution.
us in this 4 horizontal, a vertical. And VistaVision was a exclusive domain of Paramount, and Hitchcock did a lot of films in VistaVision, and that was led to be, the word is it's no bigger than your average slide. It's only 8 perfs. Then
It sounds larger than life. Though, doesn't
Exactly.
It sounds epic. It's great marketing.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. The point that you go to about distribution. I mean, we're here on Instagram Live and YouTube Live, and we're sharing this with the world for free right now. So that's, we're so fortunate to be able to do something of this scale where we can talk to people around the world and share information and share knowledge. It's like having a public access TV, like Wayne's World, except
Yes.
even bigger reach than Wayne's World. So if you haven't seen Wayne's World, watch that movie this
Swing.
weekend. Aye. But my point there is, at this time, the hardware that theater owners had was pretty much a big capital investment. So you'd have a projector and you'd have a room set up for that, and then people would be spilling their sodas and popcorn and making a big mess. But they'd only have like 1 projector per room, and if they were lucky,
two
maybe
projectors.
2 projectors.
Yeah.
Why would they have 2?
At the time, and currently, if you want to project a movie that's distributed by Hollywood, in the classic movie houses, they had 1 projector that would run for 10 minutes, and then you change over to the other projector. You did not have 10,000 feet, you had 1,000 feet. 10,000 feet would be 100 minutes, feature length. 1,000 feet was 10 minutes. So if you've ever, and everyone's watched a movie, or certainly older films, you will see in the top right corner a looks like a punch, like a scraped hole, and then you can count down 6 seconds, and when the second one appears, that was a signal for the projectionist to douse the one projector that's projecting the image, almost to run out and turn on the other projector, and that would start up. So every movie was shown back and forth, back and forth.
So the reels, they would actually be DJing the reel between one reel and the other reel. You weren't like hot loading a reel. You literally have two projectors side by side. Wow.
And it gave the projectionist, and I know all this because I started as a projectionist at a very young age, not movies, but film strips, slideshows, all that stuff. That's how I got into the film business.
That's so cool.
It was a big deal for the projectionist. These were carbon arcs, so the dowser was a big thing. That's what blocked the heat from that. I don't know if everyone has seen it, but it's a common thing, was a common thing when the projector jammed, that you'd see an image frozen and then it would start to melt. And that was because the dowser, the projectionist was rewinding, setting up the next reel, suddenly, oh my God, and run over and smoke up the chimney.
If you want to see a Hollywood version of this, a movie I can think of, there's probably several movies, but one I can think of off the top of my head is Fight Club, where he's inserting some of his own subliminal messages into the projection. So that's a great like Hollywood classic I can think of. So if you haven't seen Fight Club, if you do love Fight Club, drop a link in the comments below and say something. And if you haven't seen it, another assigned viewing after Wayne's World this weekend.
And if you do like projection rooms, Cinema Paradiso is great, as it's kind of all about that. And my only tribute to that was when I shot a remake of The Blob in 1988, and we had a projection room. The Blob weasels his way into the projection room, and the air conditioner's not working. So that was my only tribute to the projection world. But if you look at this, you can see this. There were a lot of different film stocks that were produced, 9.5 and 17.5. I joined the 9.5 club when I lived in England in the late 60s. This idea was that the sprocket holes should be on the frame line, so the frame could go as wide as you wanted.
Oh, interesting.
These are all on their side. They would all be run vertical, except for IMAX, which was horizontal. What's interesting is all of us who are camera people, as well as projectionists, know that when a camera or a projector loses its loop and the claws that are on, and the sprocket holes on the side with the image in the center, the claws will chew
Decimate.
the periphery.
Decimate its own self,
Yeah, but
Self-immolate.
those you could still correct it with a tape splicer. With this and this, with the sprocket in the center, if it loses its loop, it chews up the image. So there was a bit of a logic gap there. And
Risky.
Risky, yes. So in the world that we live, here's digital, and IMAX is a name that's been thrown around lately. But how to get widescreen? Here's this is all of them, and they're 28 mil. I don't know who that was. Here's scope, 266, 255. So, but the very first widescreen was interesting. Let me go to where my brain takes me, and if anyone grew up in the 50s, this is what people did. Before that, when there was a radio, people would sit around a radio and they'd look at it. Like, you can hear it from the next room. You don't need to look at the radio. But TV, it actually made that official. So everybody, this was the latest and greatest, and everybody would watch TV. They'd sit around and watch. What happened when they sat home and watched TV? Here's Richard Nixon and Pat Nixon watching TV. I don't know who's on TV. There's LBJ watching who knows who. But what happened when they were watching TV is that they weren't going to the theater. And theater owners said, well, come on in, it's air conditioned, it's this and that. Oh no, we're good. We'll stay home with Milton Berle and the Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason and Lucille Ball. We don't want to go to the movies.
So would you say that television, in a way, was the Netflix of the 1950s, in that you could stay home and get your entertainment at home? So in a way, the big picture is that the big picture was being driven by the small picture, because if people can stay home and watch on a small tube,
Yeah.
there's no necessary impetus to go out and spend money on hot dogs, popcorn, and that theater
And
experience.
admission, you know, pay to get inside to watch. So movies.
So they were feeling the pinch.
Theater owners were absolutely, and I'm showing you Cinerama as one of the first forays into attracting people back from watching TV, and it's interesting. Let me go and find the very beginning of all this. Widescreen as this format, and this was CinemaScope in 1927. A French filmmaker called Abel Gance, Gance, was made his magnum opus about Napoleon, the greatest Frenchman of all time, even though he was from Corsica, but nobody cares about that. And his scope, the whole movie wasn't 3 projectors, 3 cameras, but that was how he saw, that was the only way to mechanically get the scope of something. Now, in other words, now you have a widescreen image.
A vista, a panorama.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you could do it as a triptych, this being the triptych, and then the multi-screen thing. And this has been a staple at World's Fairs, all kinds of things. The 1939 World's Fair was quite a big deal. And the man who made some of the big projection things was this guy, Fred Waller, who in upstate New York, he had an image that he created with 5 cameras. And he was obsessed with 5 cameras. This was the rig he used for the 1939 World's Fair, which was in America. There's no war. The world is at our doorstep. Didn't happen quite that way, but Fred had all this technology, and he turned it into something after Pearl Harbor, when the War Department said, the Pentagon wasn't around until 1945. The War Department said, we need something to train gunners, and that's who these guys are. And they ended up in front of this device that projected the 5 cameras, footage now projected in a sphere. And they learned how to accurately shoot down German and Japanese airplanes. That was kind of the thing.
So this is sort of, in a way, a precursor to virtual reality, a precursor to gaming, because they're running a simulator to learn, you know, how to best operate these aircraft, right? And, that's pretty fascinating stuff.
And what it led to was his mindset that if he used more cameras and a bigger, wider screen, then it would be an immersive experience. 50 years ahead of putting goggles on and just lying back on a couch and you're in outer space or whatever. So that was his impetus to create Cinerama, which used 3 cameras, and I'll explain those. It was a very special design, and 3 projectors. So it meant that the screen had to be curved, and you know, if you didn't get a good seat, you were off center. But if you in the center, in the sweet spot, this whole panorama filled your peripheral. That was the first immersive experience from wartime to this, and it meant 2 things. One, that the screen had to be curved. Purpose-built domes were the best way to do that, as opposed to hacking theaters apart. You know, you would put this curved screen and take out a bunch of seats and then put up different projection rooms. Theater owners who wanted, they had 2 projectors in one theater. That was it, 35 mil. We don't want new stuff. Come on.
This is a lot of infrastructure to put in. So, you know, in a time, especially if there's fewer audience members coming to the theater to watch movies, then it's harder to spend that money, right? So just kind of like now, we're in a sort of a financial recession in terms of movie making. It feels like, where people are not investing as much into new production at the moment.
Right.
And in a way that might be partly because there's sort of a bubble that was built up, and so everybody's sort of cash poor or strapped to spend money to hire us back out into the world and make more movies.
Well, there's many perspectives on where Netflix went wrong.
Valid.
Yes. And they thought, we know the future, and it's an algorithm. Okay, well, telling stories with pictures and telling stories with algorithms are 2 different things. But we won't get into that. Nonetheless, this was how you saw a Cinerama film. this is how it was shot, with essentially one camera with 3 cameras attached to it and 3
Wow.
lenses. It was quite elaborate, and yet not really that big. It was like a Mitchell BNC on its end, that same kind of size. There's the specs, absolutely. 3 27mm lenses made by Kodak. And those lenses, once again, the size of your thumbnail. Very, very small. And they fit, let's see if I can find that picture. There's how the 3 magazines worked. The magazines were actually, had most of the movement inside. The camera itself was small. It just was, would receive these movements. There's the camera itself with the shutter. Had a, I'll show you in a minute, but that was the global spinning shutter.
Wow.
It was mechanical, of course, and this is a magazine with, as you can see, a whole lot of movement involved. So that ultimately would go into place, and this whole monster camera, 9/10 of it was the magazine and the movement, and the little tiny lens. Oh, here they are. So that's what the lens is.
This is an important one. So look at, this is really interesting for any camera assistants or people who have had to be a camera assistant in the past. It's interesting to see how those lenses are coupled with this gearing configuration, right? So would an assistant be able to just pull focus with one knob and it would focus all 3 lenses? Or do you think that they were mostly shooting at a hyperfocal distance?
I think in most situations, the Cinerama was to give you depth. So it added, it was 266, it was massively wide. But you didn't want to have things shallow. So these were microscopic lenses in the sense that they had their own infinite depth of field. And then, so focus pulling was kind of a secondary issue. But it certainly, here's one of 3 viewfinders.
Holy moly.
I should say 1 viewfinder. You take the mag off and put it in place. This mechanism would go into the gate, and then you'd sight the center lens, and then the left and right one. I'm showing you all these in progression here. If you like slating things, that's what you need. You need some strong
Triple
hands.
slate.
Yeah, and this is, I don't know if the 8th Army actually, 8th Day, the U.S. Army, I think that's something else.
That's the sequel to that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, 7th Day. 7th Day.
Get in the chopper, it's the 7th
Another
day.
viewing recommendation for the weekend if you haven't seen it.
So the camera itself was huge, and it went into a blimp that was even huger. That was a massive thing. That looked like a trailer, looked like a horse trailer. Like what? And these things, Cinerama was smart. They said this is going to be a roadshow experience. These are microphones. They made quadraphonic or pentaphonic sound, 5 microphones that would then blend into this, because they owned the dome, the whole process, and they'd retrofit other theaters and put microphone or speakers everywhere. So surround sound in 1953. One thing that Fred Waller invented, as well as Cinerama, was water skiing. So all of his, before they got to a narrative film called How the West Was Won, they would do kind of thrill rides, and for some reason everyone was water skiing. Let me get back to where nobody knew why. Oh yes, here's the viewfinder, and this is Henry Hathaway, who directed most of the segments of How the West Was Won, which was the first narrative film, one of the first and last, but that's a whole other story. And so that was this monster. This was a viewfinder, and they would walk around and set the shot, and then the camera would kind of go there, and maybe if you're lucky, you'd put this viewfinder on top. There's the camera. Nobody wanted to put it in the blimp. Everything was pretty well the same. There was a problem with John Ford. His usual place before Video Village on a Mitchell was to lean on the motor housing, on the dumb side, not on the operator side, and he would watch the performance. Because this camera now saw everywhere, his usual spot meant he was in the movie. And he was blind in that eye, unfortunately, so it was up to John Wayne. Pappy, come on back a little, lean back a little. And anyway, that's more history. These are that's the shot that this setup got. And it was a big deal to make something, to tell stories with pictures, and to make them wider. The mechanics of it were one thing. There's Pappy Ford, who lost his eye through impatience. He had eye surgery, and back in the 30s, and he got so annoyed with the bandage that he tore it off and permanently damaged his eye.
Oof.
And yet people who said, well, I need a video tap, I need this, I need that, I need a techno crane, I need a drone. Okay, well, let's talk about John Ford. Here's a guy who won 4 Oscars, and he only had one eye. And he certainly didn't have a video village. So what's your problem? I won't get into that. But yeah, that is how there's the viewfinder on top. I'm going to find another one. I don't know who this guy is. He didn't amount to much, I don't think. Just kidding. So yeah, it's funny to see these little quartz lights hidden away. They were kind of newly introduced. So there's a perfect view to get anamorphic, or not anamorphic, a widescreen, Cinerama. It had 3 viewfinders that could then, you could go from one to the other to see the shot, and then attach the magazines, and you wouldn't see it anymore. You were bore sighting through the lenses.
And this looks like they're inside of the wagon, right? So
Yeah.
you're kind of in the perspective of being in the wagon looking out over the vast field.
And
Wow.
there are 2 passengers and horses and all that. The film itself was, let me see, here we go. That scene we saw at on the riverbank that John Ford directed. But this is what widescreen, how it was created in a kind of a mechanical way. You can see, and if you're eagle-eyed, you can see the blend lines where the 3 projectors would overlap. And it pretty well showed up everywhere. It doesn't show up here too much. Gets a lot of vertical stuff.
Something magical about these panoramic images, though, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah, look
I
at
see
that.
these, they're low resolution, but they look photographic and they draw you in. I want to go to wherever these people are right now. I want to go out on the plains and see that. I want to be there. So it feels like, here we are years and years later looking at these scans, and it's like, I'm compelled by these images.
And this is what Hollywood was selling, those compelling images, that someone would see this in a newspaper or maybe on a TV commercial, I don't know, but in the 50s, and they would say, we're going out to the movies tonight, Martha, and the kids and the whole deal. And that was kind of that same attraction.
That artwork rules. I mean, this is making me, this is getting me excited. I like this kind of storytelling.
You guys can watch it on online, or certainly on a streaming thing. I forget what platform it's on, but it's really worth watching.
And they kind of are selling it like the characters are really literally popping out of the frame in the poster art, right?
Yeah.
Like the horse is stepping out of the frame. So it
Yeah.
makes you feel like the world is leaving the screen and immersing
It's coming
you.
to you.
Yeah.
And what was interesting, this was, they call it, nicknamed the Smile Box, but that was 3 projectors and 3 cameras, 3 projectors, and inside a curve. And all the theater owners who said, well, yeah, that's great. We don't have that. We don't have 3 projectors. We have 2 projectors, and they're side by side. So what are you going to do? And this was the conversion to widescreen. But this is where Hollywood started scratching its head even more. How do we project this widescreen image? And so that was the first question that was solved with, these are more, I'll just blip through this.
Yeah, is that like a triple telecine down, like a blow down to one frame, or how would they package that? That's cool.
Yeah, they composited in an optical printer. But projecting it, 235, and then it was, the irony, they would end up on TV, pan and scan. So that you went to the great expense and risk and a kind of vision to make it 266. Oh no, we'll cut that in half, 133, and you watch the center image. There was another system, I'll just mention it, called, yes, you can see Vistarama. There was a lot of them. It was called Cinemiracle. And instead of having that vertical system, but it actually used 3 existing cameras, and these were Mitchell NCs. There was a patent issue. They couldn't do the mechanics of getting these big cameras close enough together to have the single point of view that then shared 3 perspectives. They ended up using mirrors. So the mirrors themselves were the center lens and the other 2 mirrors. This camera would see that, and that camera would see that. It was quite bizarre. And the only film that they made was, let me get back to it, was called Windjammer. And it had huge scope. Let's see, yeah, here it is. This was, again, bounced off mirrors. So this was 1 projection room instead of 3.
Wow.
And they ended up with the same big screen effect. And they, in fact, would play in the Cinerama Dome theaters. This is Hollywood Boulevard. So it was a big deal. Windjammer, Cinemiracle, not Cinerama. And that was a huge travelogue. And it was great. I remember seeing it. In fact, when I went to film school, I'm going to go back to show you one of my film professors. This guy, Louis de Rochemont III, and this was his father, Louis de Rochemont II. I'm guessing there's another one, but I don't know. And Louis was the director of Windjammer with all 3 of these projectors. And we were all kids in 1970 going to film school, but we had seen Windjammer. And that, you know, here they are shooting the real deal on the bounding main. And he said, I'm going to get a print of Windjammer. You're going to see it. And he did get a print of different cameras.
Ah.
So we didn't, you know.
Not a combined print. Just
no,
like
just one. So it'll be the center one, and then you watch that for 10 minutes, and then it'll be this one, and all the action's over there, then that one, and all the action's over here.
choose your own adventure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he was quite an adventure.
What did he ever recall any interesting stories from that production to your class, or you know, do you have any funny stories about him as a character? He looks like an interesting person. That looks like a very fascinating movie to make. I mean,
well, the nice thing about it is that it had an actual viewfinder, and Gain Rescher was one of the cinematographers on it. Here's the camera setup, and here is the viewfinder, the front side, and here is same thing, and it ended up, there's how it actually worked. Instead of ganged together, those 3 little lenses, they were still the same lenses, but they'd bounce off a mirror. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why they chose a film that was at sea, where there's salt spray and water everywhere, to do a film with mirrors. How do you keep those mirrors dry? I really don't know.
they like the challenge.
I guess. And here is the viewfinder itself, which looks kind of familiar, like an airy viewfinder.
That's cool.
And there's the 3 lenses, and it went underneath, and you'd lean over, and there's the viewfinder itself.
Looks like
and
a Star Wars weapon to me. Some kind of a lightsaber.
Probably. But so that's how widescreen was created. And Hollywood said, yes, we love the scope of it. And the theater chain said, yeah, okay. But, and they are the ones, and everyone's heard of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There's another NATO called National Association of Theater Owners, and they are the ones who decide what's what. And they are the ones who meet the, let me find something else here, meet the audience head on and say, well, we'll give you what we can. Now here's the film that started it all in terms of anamorphic widescreen.
So to just set the stage again for the people out there that are kind of just coming into this, we're here with Mark Irwin, ASC, CSC today, talking about the history of widescreen and panoramic movie making and storytelling, and recounting sort of the origin of why people were, first of all, attracted to the idea of a panoramic image. It's just sort of ingrained in us naturally as human beings. If we're fortunate enough to have sight in both eyes, unlike Pappy Ford, we have a binocular vision, so we have a wider field of view naturally, and our eyes are always ping-ponging region of interest, whether it's Ford and we're hunting our lunch, or off to the sides to be afraid of whether a lion or a tiger or some kind of attacking animal is going to prey on us for lunch. And so that sort of balance between forward and peripheral vision is something that is an interesting storytelling driver in terms of the mind and being receptive to storytelling. And so people would stop going to the movies because of a little box at home, the Netflix of their time television. And theater owners, theater chains, which were also very vertically integrated with the movie studios, were losing revenue because people were watching that Netflix of their time TV at home, free-to-air television, right?
And
so,
what's interesting is that it was better. It had more variety, just by consequence. Because Hollywood was making gangster movies and westerns and pillow talk movies with Doris Day, and audience were getting tired of that. And they would go and watch The Honeymooners and I Love Lucy and Sid Caesar. These were variety shows as well as what we now know as sitcoms. And everything was there. The only drawback is that you had to get up to change the channel and then sit down again.
And it's closer to real time too in terms of production, right? So they can be very reactive to current events. So if something funny happens, they can incorporate that to kind of reflect the culture, the zeitgeist of the time back to the audience and be relatable. Much like we're interacting with you live around the world through Instagram Live and YouTube Live. So leave some comments or some questions from Mr. Irwin or from myself. We'd love to hear from you if you have questions or comments about widescreen filmmaking, the history of panoramic imaging, and we're getting right into the most exciting part for me, CinemaScope, which you're looking at the two of us right now through a CinemaScope lens, which we'll get to in a moment. So we're actually looking through a historical lens right now on the stream. But go ahead, tell us about the robe and about...
I'll loop all the way back to this moment, because I didn't know you had this lens. We have one at the clubhouse, at ASC Clubhouse. And these are, to me, these are the moments of connection. It isn't just I read about it or I saw a picture of it. Like, this is the actual lens. But let me rewind. We talked about multiple cameras and multiple projectors and theater chains saying, we just want... It was Mike Todd who created many things and died in a plane crash. He partnered with American Optical Company and created Todd AO. And that name has traveled everywhere through the years, but it was an anamorphic optical system. He believed in widescreen using an anamorphic system, which was, and his common complaint with all these projectors breaking down and the cameras, it's all got to come out of one hole, meaning the projection room, one lens, one camera, one lens, one projection lens. So when this was the first film that was released, and I'll clarify, the robe, everyone points to that. That was the first film that Fox made. They were the first ones to buy into the Technoscope, or not Technoscope, the CinemaScope system. And this was a huge, huge thing. This is the ads went from this to this, ta-da! And the scope of it was literally that, with chariots and swords. And this was the time of sword and sandal movies. So CinemaScope was a breakthrough, and what it began as, let me just drift through these. There's standard 133 and CinemaScope. That's what audiences weren't getting at home. They weren't getting this. They were getting that, and this is unfair. It's kind of a cropped image, but that's what you would see at 133, and that's what CinemaScope provided. And it was Vista. Here's the man who had, in many ways, he looks like a central casting version of the absent-minded professor. His name was Henri Chrétien, and he was a French optical designer. I'm quickly running out of juice. And he was a guy who had what he said. This, I can play a trick on with images. He found a way, instead of multiple cameras, to create a wide image. He ended up saying, I know what I can do. I can take this and squeeze it into this square image, and then later on we will project it and unsqueeze it.
Now, the story that has been recounted to me about how Chrétien applied that technology was during World War I, the French tanks would have a periscope system for sighting as you're driving this tank along, and they needed to be able to see panoramically if Germans are coming from the left or the right of the tank, and with a monoscope periscope, you wouldn't have much of a field of view. And so he developed the Anamorphosphere as an optical device that would give a wide-angle field of view to a single periscope telescope system.
Sounds credible.
Yeah, this is what I've been told.
I don't doubt it. And he ended up not being able to sell this to the film community in France.
Correct.
They just didn't get the wide angle thing. And the French, at that time, the French were doing things that were story driven. Post-war France, and this was 1953, they kind of ignored this crazy guy with the idea of that. But he persevered, and here he is with his biggest customer, who was Spiro Skouras, chairman of 20th Century Fox, who Hollywood just went crazy after TV got big. And they said, we got to do something, we got to do something. They went all over the world, and this guy made the deal, and he bought that little thing, which was this hypergonar lens system. And here it is in use in Hollywood with a Fox simplex camera, and that was the actual system. This was the taking lens, the hypergonar thing. This front element was what made all the difference. Here's what really made the difference: the partnership between this and a projection lens. So this would squeeze the image in, and the projection lens would unsqueeze it.
So everyone out there in the audience, you're probably familiar with the idea of a codec. You know, when we're recording on a Sony FX3 or something like that, or a Canon C400, there's a compressor, a software compressor, that's compressing the image and shrinking the file size down to be recorded on recording media. And then when we distribute it and it goes back out for viewing, whether that's viewing on Instagram or YouTube Live, it's being decompressed. So the codec is a compressor and decompressor mechanism for packing more frames or more story, more data into a smaller area. And essentially, an anamorphic lens is a hardware codec. It's compressing the wide angle field of view, the panoramic image, left to right, and then decompressing it on the projection side, like Mr. Irwin was saying, to be projected back out. So the two essential parts are the compressor, which exists on the camera side, and then many more people are using the decompressor in the theater. So they need a lot of those projection lenses to be able to distribute the movies as they're being sent around.
We're looking at an image of the Americanized version of Chrétien's optical design. And this is interesting. It evolved from that little tiny box to this lens made by Bosch and Lomb in Rochester, New York.
And this lens that we see
we're looking at it right now
in the camera is actually the same focal length and type of lens that is looking at Mr. Irwin and I here on the stream. So
I've been saved.
This particular lens that we're looking through is actually from the Warner Brothers camera department. And if anyone was at Cinegear this year, at the Atlas Lens Co booth, we actually had one of these Warner Brothers loaned lenses that was used on Rebel Without a Cause in the booth. So you could actually see yourself through the lens of history and take a picture with the lens. So we had a nice little setup, and we'll probably do that at future trade shows. But in case you're wondering, you can actually come see the Atlas Kane's Family CinemaScope Anamorphic Museum right here at Atlas Lens Co. any Wednesday at Wednesday Lens Day from 10:30 a.m. to 1:30. So if you're here in California visiting from anywhere in the world, we welcome you. If you're a California native, we still want to see you every week if you're around. If you're not working, a great place to come hang out is Wednesday Lens Day with Atlas. Experience the museum, meet some of our great folks who work here with us, and bring your own camera. We have tons of cameras. Bring your own lenses. It's a really nice vibe. You've been to Wednesday Lens Day before with us, right?
Yes.
It's
and
pretty fun.
It's in beautiful downtown Burbank, California as well. So that's the reason to come here. The beautiful
Scenery.
mountain, yes. But in terms of scenery, this is the lens that we are looking at. It's photographing us. Began like this, and ended up evolving thanks to Bosch and Lohm. This was that little tiny lens that ended up evolving through Fox to this lens, and here it is. It was Americanized, basically. It made it bigger.
That's a particularly special one. So
Yeah.
something I could share about,
Yeah.
if you can hold up that one.
Yeah, so this was-
This is how they'd use the original Baltar. So this is a Bosch and Lohm Baltar. So you can make a movie with just this part. This is the taking lens. And then this is the anamorphic adapter licensed from Mr. Chrétien. But the reason that camera people had a hard time with this system when they made movies like The Robe
Yeah.
is that you'd have to pull focus on this lens with a little
Yeah.
lever, and you'd have to pull focus on this lens at the same time. But the really difficult part was that the focus marks on this lens and the focus mark on this lens are asynchronous, and they
Yes.
also go in opposite directions. So you are driving stick shift with two different sticks
Yeah.
at the same time. It's a little bit challenging.
And Hollywood didn't want, what they really didn't want was two focus pullers for one lens, for one camera. Like, wait a minute.
Focus pullers didn't want that either.
No,
They're
that
like,
was
"That's
a
my
true
lens."
headache. But if you, again, go online and check out The Robe, and it was the first anamorphic film ever released. It was not the first shot, which is interesting.
Question coming in here.
Oh, questions, yes.
We love questions.
Yeah, Julius on YouTube wants to see some flares, so.
Flares.
Yeah, we got you, Julius.
Never heard of it.
Julius,
Who would-
where are you shouting out from? Is that you, Mr. Caesar? We were talking about sword and sandal movies, so
Yes.
sorry, I don't mean to make fun of your name, just goofing with you. But this is a CinemaScope flare with a LED, the best of 1954 with the best of 2024. And you can see the flickering because it's a LED, it's asynchronous, but
LED.
really nice flare. And this is a 40 millimeter CinemaScope Baltar you're looking at us through. I like the off-axis ones personally. Look at those, the way they break up. And then, you know, we actually did something very clever. So one of the big challenges that they faced making movies with lenses like this, besides having to pull focus in two different directions,
Yeah.
is that even after they designed these bigger, as you said, Americanized clunky boys, these are actually some of the world's first computer-aided design lenses. So in
This is a breakthrough.
around 1955, 1956, they actually used IBM computers to calculate the coefficient and the relationship between the two lens groups, which are what those two blocks were, and then build these integrated CinemaScope lenses. So you can see the profile of the lens here and an Oscar. They won an Academy Award for using computer-aided design. And the second thing that we do when we're designing a lens today is open the computer and start designing the lens in the computer. First, we talk about what makes a good lens for the particular use case that we're looking at. But the second thing we'll do is open the computer and start trying to simulate it or lay it
Yeah.
out. And to think that they were using computers when a computer was the size of this whole building and you'd have to program it by punching punch cards, to me is pretty astounding, something far beyond imagination. And you look at these pictures from the way they'd have to light the set with these giant
Yeah.
arc lights, and just the amount of human energy and output and collaboration needed to tell these stories is nothing short of inspiring to me, because that's a lot of work and a lot of output that we have to put out to make these great stories and tell these stories and have fun doing it and, you know, make a living for our families. So that's
And
really important to me.
I'd
you
like
know.
to point out, only because I've been in the business for a long time, and you look at everything. This is what Americans did. Nobody else did this. Everyone copied it, the Russians and the British and the French and everything, but Americans designed this. This was not a, well, maybe let's try that. No, let's get a computer, let's do it, let's make a system, let's make this world dominating. And they did. And here's some pictures. This was the Monsieur Chrétien with his humble little camera, and then it evolved quite quickly to adapting this little box into an American camera system. And here's the designer. Don't forget, this is a Baltar made by Bosch and Lomb. That's where Baltar comes from. So here is John D. Hayes. I'm reading this because I wrote it down on Instagram, but they designed it and built it, and then built a whole system around it.
Shout out to Rochester, New York, which is the cradle of American optical technology, the home of Bosch and Lomb. We were talking about our eyeglasses earlier. You know,
Yeah.
Bosch and Lomb doesn't make cinema lenses anymore, and so for them, this was just a foray into something that was a sideline or something of a distraction from their mainline products. But I think it's fascinating to see it hold up today and where we are right now. And we did a little bit of a cheat, because when you use one of these lenses, it's compressing the field of view. And this is a great slide if you back up to the mumps. So
early optical design.
the big drawback of this lens is that when you focus close to us like we are here, the anamorphic ratio goes from being about a 2 down to being about 1.7 at close focus for some of these lenses. And so people's faces would tend to warp out like this. So we did a little bit of a cheat today, and we set the Alexa camera that we're filming through to a 1.8 squeeze. So you and I look pretty normal. I mean, as normal as we can look, right?
We don't look as good as this guy, Ryan Gosling. He's got the mumps and he doesn't hear. What happened? So yeah, this modern optics, it's still prevalent, and you can. I think this was shot on film, but
definitely shot on film, and I believe this was shot on Panavision C series by Mr. Lena Sandgren, ASC FSF. We'll have to ask him about that scene.
Speaking of Panavision, this is interesting. This is what Bosch and Lomb created, this monstrosity to get rid of the mumps, and Panavision created this Panatar series and ended up amalgamating that all into Panavision started as projection lenses for theaters who realized widescreen's the way to go. This is a market, let's fill it. And then they saw, oh, you have a problem with mumps? We'll solve that too. And so one by one, Hollywood studios realized, well, we don't know what we're doing. We don't need to have these cameras. We'll sell them and rent them, and to someone who will specialize in that.
It's interesting to see a paradigm shift there, right? Because this is a big hour-long talk that I give about the triangle of commerce, artistry, and technology, and how it defines our medium as filmmakers. And if you ever want to come to Wednesday Lens Day, or if you manage to see me at a college, I'll give a presentation to your college about this. But I want to inspire everyone out there in the audience to take control of their own financial medium and their possibilities, both as creative people, technicians, and as artists, and take control of your life and your future, and try to figure out your path forward, because if you don't, someone else will. And that's sort of the story of how anamorphic lenses came to be, is that the studios needed the cheapest solution to make a panoramic movie, and that ended up being anamorphic lenses. And then that transformed the entire industry, because you no longer had vertical integration with the studio. So it opened up a new financial opportunity for Panavision, who was making, as you said, projector lenses, because if there's 7,000 or more studios, or I'm sorry, 7,000 or more theaters where they're distributing these films, there's a huge need for these lenses in the theaters to show these panoramic movies that everyone wants to see, that they call CinemaScope. And so that was a huge business opportunity. But then it goes back to the source of making the art. And if you're having a hard time making images that make the ladies and people like Fred Astaire or Frank Sinatra look great on camera when they're in close-up, then you need to imbue that technology into the lens. And that's where Panavision came in and reinvented the camera department. So they were no longer, as you said, integrated into the studio. The studios would have to rent. And so that's the beginning of the rental house model that many of us know and experience as camera people today.
And that unified things. Paramount's VistaVision, everybody had different systems. They said, ours is better, ours is better. And one by one in the late 50s, early 60s, they said, okay, it's not better. And Panavision, Super Panavision, which was 65 mil, 70 mil, not Gone with the Wind, Lawrence of Arabia size, that became, and those movies at that stage were about going to the movies. You would actually get a ticket, a selected seat. People would wear a suit and tie and get all dressed up to go to the movies because it was a big deal. And I remember as being a kid at 6 years of age in Toronto, going to see Boxing Day, going to see a theatrical presentation, theater of Treasure Island. And we're in the audience, and these guys are on in a rowboat scraping these oars on the stage as it rotates. I'm thinking, 6 years old, this is pretty cheesy. And then go to the movies that night to see Gulliver's Travels, and to be in this theater when the screen came up, and it was huge, and it was that was a story. Being in an audience, seeing people talk, you think, okay. Being in an audience, seeing people on the screen talking, this kind of that was the breaking point for me, or the turning point for me.
Captivating, right?
Yeah, and that's how we've done it. What's interesting, I want to show you something. How much time do we have, by the way?
We're coming up on an hour.
Okay, so these are clips from movies that I've done. This is my Instagram page. What's interesting is that Spiro Skouras was a showman, and one of his stars, he made all of her films in the later part of her career, was Marilyn Monroe. And here is a NATO, National Association of Theater Owners, brochure saying how good, extolling the virtues of CinemaScope. And here's Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean holding a projection lens, a CinemaScope lens, and with the somewhat naughty statement of Mr. Xanax is bigger. This was how Hollywood dealt with promoting things in those days. But this film,
I don't know if that's up to code.
but this is the film that was first shot in CinemaScope, not released. Because I think the Bible Belt said, oh, I don't know about that. And Hollywood said, yeah, you're right. Maybe we should show the Sword and Sandal one first, which luckily was a success. What I love is that not only is it shot in CinemaScope, but you can see it without glasses, meaning plastic or cardboard little glasses.
They're kind of downplaying 3D, right? Because 3D was another immersive technology that every couple years people think 3D is going to be a thing, and then we realize, hey, CinemaScope, Anamorphic, baby, it's the way.
And bigger is better in some sense. The aspect ratio is something that we still chase. Because as you can see in 235, a two-shot is a tight two-shot. This is why I like shooting anamorphic, because I can get that tight coverage without other cuts. If it's 185 or 166, then I'm loose enough that I need coverage.
Down to singles, right?
Yeah, and but every filmmaker will kind of reflect on what I refer to as the tyranny of the over shoulder. So that certainly showrunners or anyone on TV, if people are walking and talking, if you've ever watched Law and Order, people will walk and talk 3 pages on a Steadicam. The minute they stop, oh, we need overs, we need coverage. So don't ever stop walking. But that's most TV. If you watch a Hallmark film, that's based on a two-shot, single. Anamorphic says the two-shot works, and you can get the scope of it. My common complaint about anamorphic is it's shot wide open. The fact that you're seeing scope means your brain is seeing that scope. Your brain is a 50 mil lens, and an anamorphic 50 has a field of view of a 25. So now you're seeing something wider, and your brain's saying, why isn't it all in focus? What's going on here? So I feel every time I've shot anamorphic, it's been 4, 5, 6. I took that from the Brits, who just said, jolly good stop, jolly good stop. Growing up in Toronto with the different DPs. So that's how I learned. And you give your audience the information rather than just saying, well, her eyelashes are in focus, so that's enough for you. So that's part of storytelling that is required.
I think we're lit to a 4 here on the CinemaScope Baltar today. So that's amazing. If you were to cite, before we sign off, and maybe there's a couple other questions from the audience, and can you also show that frame of them underwater filming? Which film was this?
This was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
So I'm glad that we have this, because this is actually my favorite original CinemaScope movie.
And it's interesting to note, when Fox got CinemaScope, they said to Hollywood, you can lease it from us, we're not saying it's ours. And Disney said yes. A bunch of other RKO would go on a different, smaller route, but Disney said yes, and they animated. They made CinemaScope cartoons, but this film for sure, that was their big one. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Do you have any particular favorites from from this era that are your favorites as far as CinemaScope format movies?
That's a good question.
20,000 Leagues is mine. I think that still holds up. And if you hit us in the comments, I can give you a link to, it's an unlisted YouTube link that's behind the scenes of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's
Yeah.
a feature-length behind the scenes documentary that I love watching from time to time. But yeah, what's your favorite of this time? And then we also have a question coming in from the audience if you want to relay that.
So Alex Baudelaire is asking, where does Bad Day at Black Rock 1955 fit in? A rather impressive widescreen film with virtually no close-ups.
Bad Day at Black Rock.
Yes, let me
That's
look
a
at it.
deep cut. I haven't seen that film yet, so I will
Spencer
have to
Tracy with
look
one
into it.
arm, a great, great movie. And Robert Ryan plays a very bad guy. Bad Day at Black Rock. John Sturgis, who went on to direct The Great Escape. Let me see who shot it. Bill Miller shot it. Let's find some details on it. This is how everything is known. All the specs on, here it is.
CinemaScope.
Yeah. So I think learning how to use a wider screen, a wider aspect ratio, and staging things, I think the flow of a scene is important. Although there's a hell of a lot of cuts. So certainly with the fight scenes with Ernest Borgnine and Robert Ryan, but it was a kind of a stage play that went outdoors. And sorry, clarify the question.
I think they were asking how it fits into the oeuvre, right, of this time period. I mean, and I think that they were saying there's no close-ups. So this might, without having seen the movie, have you seen the film?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so you know the film.
Yeah.
My only theory, based on what we know about the technical qualities of the lenses, is that the minimum focus distance on a lot of these lenses is at least 6 feet. So you're not going to get closer than 6 feet without a diopter. And then there's limited number of diopters. I actually have. I didn't know they made diopters for these, but recently we've added a set of original CinemaScope diopters to the museum. But I would imagine that maybe they hadn't made the diopters yet.
Or you get a close up on a 100 mil.
True.
That's at 6 feet for sure. But that was not the style. Doing 3 pages. If you see films like Casablanca, they will do a 3 or 4 or 5 minute dolly shot. Where's the coverage? Well, I don't see the need for coverage. And the same with this, there was a lot of conflict. So the only problem with blocking like that is that you end up a lot in profile. And here's an example. They would play these scenes, and the director knew how to figures in the frame as opposed to figures in the landscape. And he would play the mood and drama rather than people showing up and talking. 6 pages later, they walk away. Like, no, they'll do 1 page and then get up and move here, and this guy will move there. So the dynamics of that, I think we're also growing. Hollywood was definitely learning how to use that wider screen to tell a story in a better way. I'm seeing if there's any of these. Yeah, this was a totally made town out in near Chino Hills, or I'm sorry, Alabama Hills. And learning to use that aspect ratio to strengthen the story rather than just, well, we'll do a wide shot and then go for a close-up. Hollywood didn't think that way. Now TV has forced people to think that way. But these are the dynamics that when you see, this is not 235, but this is how you would stage things. And actors, now I ask actors to find the lens and they, what do you mean? Like the Hollywood actors in those days would play a whole scene naturally and find the lens. So this was part of the vocabulary of telling stories with a wider screen. It wasn't, it's funny, when Anamorphic CinemaScope came out, critics would say, oh, this is a aspect ratio, a frame for boa constrictors mating. That was thought to be pretty funny. Well, maybe so, but I think young guys like Steven Spielberg figured out how to do it, so. It's,
another question from Instagram.
yeah.
What kind of lenses were the Shaw brothers using for filming kung fu movies in the 1960s to 80s? A lot of those films were anamorphic.
Well, that's interesting. There was a whole, I'm just going to scroll to it because there were other people, essentially studios who couldn't afford to pay the rights to Fox to use CinemaScope lenses, actual CinemaScope lenses. Here's an image of a few that were, what were they called? They were CinemaScope knockoffs because it really wasn't that difficult to make them. Oh, where am I here? Sorry, I lost track. Yeah, so these are lower budget lenses that probably they used in Asia. If I'm not mistaken, here's Naturama, Cinepanoramic. You know, this is, the optics of it didn't matter in many ways to certainly the Shaw Brothers.
I actually did some research on this recently because we had Mr. Andy Chang, who's a director and also fight stuntman,
Yeah.
stunt person, choreographer, multi-hyphenate talent, and we were talking about those Shaw Brothers films at home, my wife and I, and they actually licensed from Japan some Nippon scope lenses, which were somewhat related to Kowa anamorphic lenses. It's like a precursor to what we know as the modern Kowa, not really modern, but like 1970s Kowa.
Mm-hmm.
And they would attach to something like a Schneider or a Zeiss or a Cook back-taking lens. And so a lot of those, when they distribute the Shaw Brothers movies, they call it Shaw Scope. And Tarantino paid homage to that with Kill Bill. But Shaw Scope, sometimes they would use Technoscope, which is a 2-perf format,
Yeah.
where you'd use spherical lenses and have a 2:3:5 aspect ratio with a spherical lens. And a lot of the shots that you see with zooms from those kung fu movies were done with Technoscope format. So it's, you know, either that or they would use rear anamorphic adapters like a Shiga on something like an ingenue zoom, because they have a lot of those action zooms
Yeah.
to help tell the story in a very dynamic way. But Shiga adapters, Nippon scope lenses, NAC, which is a Japanese company. So the Shaw Brothers, I might be misinformed on this, but I believe were actually from Japan, but they took on, and they were working with a lot of the directors from post-war Japan
Yeah.
in Hong Kong. And so they took on the name Shaw, but they actually had a different surname. And they took on the name Shaw to be more culturally compatible with Hong Kong and filmmaking in China. So a lot of the directors had come over from Japan to Hong Kong to make these movies. And so they were also using some of the Japanese camera equipment like the NAC Anamorphics, which are also
Yeah.
Nippon Scope and Kowa.
And the truth is, the engineering, optically speaking, in the taking lens, this is a spherical lens. If this has high enough quality, it was a front anamorphizer that was added to a high quality lens, and that's how you got anamorphic. Technoscope was 2-perf pull down, and that was, if you've ever seen all the spaghetti westerns by Sergio Leone, Technoscope was invented by Technicolor in Rome for that purpose. So 1,000 feet was now 2,000 feet. Instead of 4 perfs, it was 2 perfs. But that meant you were projecting that much grain, and there were no flat projectors that worked, Technoscope, that had 2-perf pull down, so you would optically take a circle basically and turn it into an oval, and then that would go to a CinemaScope projecting or Panavision system, and that's how the theaters projected poor man's widescreen.
It's a clever way of hacking the
God,
platform.
yeah. It didn't hurt, and Sergio Leone was, this will never work, it's too cheap. No, it's fine. Everyone loved it. That's the particular history of how everyone started chasing this widescreen image. They knew how to tell stories in it. And it's funny when you watch TCM or Criterion watch old movies, they're all 1:3:3, black and white, and there's people, then you see the compositions, lower, upper, standing people, those dynamics, instead of the wide one where now you have 5 people. Then in those days, Humphrey Bogart and somebody else, they were all stacked in a square frame. I guess it's just, now we can have any frame size you want. I saw one film called Monica that was in 1.2:1. It was actually, it was almost square, but even taller. And that was, well, we wanted to shoot it that way. And for HD, yeah, you can do that. You can project it. There's no more gate. There's no more perforation. So that's when creativity is all that matters.
And we at Atlas have actually invented and sort of written a white paper about a new way to use anamorphic lenses where you can turn your camera body 90 degrees. So you have maximum pixel density and your sensor becomes taller. But with a 2 times anamorphic lens, you're taking that taller image. So if you have a DCI 17:9 image, it actually becomes a 9:17, and then when you de-squeeze, it becomes 18:17. So it's basically almost 1:1, just a little bit taller than 1:1. And you can create different frames within that you can nest and kind of reframe creatively. So great for social media, great for traditional 16:9, and great for online phone 9:16 distribution.
Well, that's the ironic thing, that we have eyes that go this way, and everything we shoot now is this way. What annoys me the most is when people take a picture of themselves and they do this. Like, can't you do it from here? No, I got to put, yeah, how do I look? Well, I can't see you. It's not that hard. It really isn't that hard to look through a viewfinder, and Hollywood didn't even get into reflex viewing until the 1970s. Reflex cameras. Arriflex did it in the 20s, but a spinning mirror up until the certainly late 60s, early 70s, everything was with a non-reflex camera and a side finder. So what the camera saw and what you saw were 2 different things. That became a struggle, shall we say. And I've worked with older Hollywood actors who were very, very purposeful about where they stand, hitting their mark, because they grew up in a system where the words weren't cut, the words were cut, freeze for rack over, and everyone would make sure they were on their mark, the dolly grip, everybody, the actors, because then the side finder would turn into the viewfinder, and then you'd look through the lens to make sure you had the shot, anamorphic or otherwise. And anamorphic was weird because until they got the optics in the viewfinder set, it was squeezed and you were looking at everybody like Will Chamberlain. You know, you had to compose that. Now everyone wonders where their monitor is. That's all that matters. Like, where's my monitor? And I'm only getting 2 bars. And where's my latte? Okay. Somehow Hollywood hadn't thought of that as being necessities.
Well, Mark, it's always a pleasure having you. I love hearing about your experiences, your outlook, and then looking through the lens of history at the great wealth of information and knowledge that's come before us. And so I'm really excited to see not only what you're doing next, but what I'm doing next, and what everyone out there is doing next. And hopefully we'll see you either at Atlas Wednesday, tomorrow, and if not, we'll hopefully see you next Tuesday for another telecast. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome. I appreciate it. Come on down.
Signing off. Thanks.